Hey, Chrissy here. I am a landscape architect and the owner of Kismet Design. I am a very process-driven designer, and I love sharing what I do and how I do it with anyone who's interested. Reaching your true potential and achieving your own personal goals will not happen by chance. You have to set your intentions, make a plan, and do the work. Thank you for joining me to nerd out on design. Don't forget to subscribe and to share too. Let's create something great together. I have the great pleasure of welcoming Courtney Olander to the podcast today. She is the owner of Olander Garden Design, located in North Seattle. She is not only an amazingly talented garden designer, but has also recently been featured by Fine Gardening to teach an online course on the essential guide to landscape design, as well as being featured multiple times as both a creator and a writer in multiple publications, including Fine Gardening and the Seattle Times. One of the most recent podcast episodes I just published is on networking. And in that episode, I talk about my inner circle of colleagues or business besties that I make a point to meet up with for lunch and connect with on a recurring basis. Courtney is one of those amazing people. Thank you so much, Courtney, for joining me today, as well as being part of my tribe that I can always count on for inspiration and advice.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk to you.
So to jump in, prior to starting Olander Garden Design, you had a career in stock photography and graphic design. What led you to making the career change?
Honestly, a lot of that was sort of stage of life. And I just had my son. Well, actually, he was probably about 15, 17 months old. And realizing the landscape of the business that I was in was changing. And I'd always loved the idea of landscape design. And my degree in college was actually in environmental studies. So I was trying to find a way to combine my creative interests and sort of my science background, and landscape design seemed like the perfect, I guess, matching of those two skill sets and interests. So I looked into Edmonds Community College and saw that they had a course on, it's called Hort Careers. And I signed up for it. And every night there would be 4 different people in the horticulture profession who would come and talk about what they did. And I remember coming back from that, and I was basically kind of like, this is it. I want to make the change. And then that I met a woman named Faye Greenlee who worked for the Miller Botanical Garden. And I reached out to her and asked if she would be willing to meet with me and have coffee. And so we met, and that turned into volunteering at the Miller Botanical Garden 1 day a week. And then from there, that actually turned into an internship. So it was a year-long internship. And so what I did was the internship during the day and went to school at night at Edmonds Community College and worked on the associate's degree for landscape design. It's a 2-year program, but it took me probably 4 years because I was working and going to school at night. But that's what led me into it, was honestly needing more flexibility, seeing that my prior job was going to change and, honestly, it was potentially going to be let go. So I decided this was the perfect time for me to make a career switch.
Well, and going back to school and working with a young child is quite an endeavor just in itself.
Yes, I'll admit there was definitely some moments where I was wondering what I had done. Was this a good decision? Because I had to also start picking up my own maintenance clients on the side because my husband and I, we still have, bills to pay, and he's a teacher, and I had left a career that, I was making decent money. So to go from that to volunteering and we're having an internship. So I had to also start doing maintenance on the side as well. So it was a struggle. I remember there was a couple moments where I'd pull over the car and take a nap in the car around the corner before getting home so I could have some quiet time to myself before I came home to the family. But it was totally worth it, in hindsight, like kind of starting over and paying my dues and being okay with that. That's kind of one of the pieces of advice I give people starting over career switch, is that you have to sort of set your pride aside in a way and just be willing to start at the bottom of the totem pole and rake some leaves and shovel some mulch and learn a lot, meet great people, and just inch your way forward.
At the Miller Garden, were you doing mostly maintenance?
It was maintenance. But the great thing about that is the people that work there and their willingness to share information on everything from like plant disease, best practices. And then also they're often redoing certain areas of the garden. So then we got to be involved in some construction. So whether it was like helping to lay a stone patio or like flagstone, or I remember one case actually moving boulders. So we rented one of those little mini, I guess it's kind of like not a backhoe, a bulldozer, a little mini bulldozer. And they let us drive it around. And this is a botanical garden that's known for its rare and unusual plants. So I remember being so nervous because like, oh my gosh, I'm going to drop a boulder on
or run something over.
Yeah, exactly. This one plant that is on the West Coast or something. So I was not very good at that. I think I was too worried about it. But it was mostly maintenance. But the connections, that I got from working with the people at that botanical garden and their willingness to introduce me to people in the field, because that was part of the internship, was asking me like, what do you want to do with your profession moving forward? So they then referred me to people who needed container design done, or the other maintenance clients that then it morphed into like redesigning a little portion of the garden. Not a lot of hardscaping or anything, but that's the way I sort of inched into design, like left maintenance and inched into doing design work.
So it built a pretty good foundation.
Yeah.
So going from your previous career to landscape design, undoubtedly there's a lot of overlap in skill and design theory between the two. But what specific skills and knowledge have you found to be the most beneficial and the most transitional from the one career to the next?
Yeah, it's really something, actually, in hindsight, I realize how lucky I was to have that previous career doing, I was a photo editor. And then after being a photo editor, I was doing something called creative research, which is studying visual trends in media. So it was sort of this awareness of trends. So the two things combined, I think, have really helped me in landscape design. Most specifically, I think my profession, the photo editing portion of what I did, I have a good sense of composition. I mean, this is back even when there were slides. It wasn't even digital imagery. But I would sit there at the light box she was called the director of photography, and we'd have 6 slides in front of us, all of the exact same scene, but we'd be looking at it and she'd be like, which one do you think is best? So understanding balance and scale and looking for details in the background, like, is there a orange cone that's in the background that's like, you don't want to see that. So I really had this amazing education where I got to sit next to this woman and look at imagery and figure out what's making this work and why. So understanding composition, which I think has led to my sort of understanding of spaces, and how spaces work and flow. I always say that's probably my strength in landscape design is, I'm continuing to learn with plants, but I think it's really just understanding, like I said, balance and flow and composition, and just like almost this feeling like when you're in a space, you understand why it works. And then the other thing with that photo background is my understanding of sort of the marketing side of things. I'm really lucky that I understand the power of imagery. So that's also advice I give people, is that you have to have really strong imagery if you're going to get into anything design related, landscape design, where you need to promote yourself. The devil is in the details. You have to, if you don't capture a really good image of your design, like your design can be fantastic, but if you don't represent it well in imagery, in photography or video, it's almost pointless. So you have to wait for the right light. Again, really focus on composition. What are you showing in the image? I mean, the contractors, they joke with me, like, I'll run and move a pen. If I see a pen on the path, I'll run and move it before I take the picture. They're like, oh, there's Courtney. And I'm like, well, because your eye will be drawn to that pen or that orange cone or that hose in the background. So it's always making sure when you're taking imagery, you're taking photos of your project, if you want to do it yourself, really thinking about the entire screen you're looking at. So I've been really lucky that I think that's one of the strengths of my business, and that's translated over from my photo editing background, is understanding imagery and the power of imagery, and having that on my social media and my website.
And your website is a mix of your own personal photos, and I know there's a couple projects that you've had professionally shot as well. But
Yeah.
what do you have, a professional camera that you use to take pictures, or do you?
Honestly, it's just on my cell phone now. It used to be I had a Lumix that was a professional, sort of like a high res camera, but I don't even use that anymore. Most of it, honestly, is just on my cell phone because you can get such good quality images now. Yeah.
And it's available when you're there at that time where light is right and things are clean. And
yeah, exactly. I'd say just like take your time and sit there and really look into the frame, look at everything, what's happening, how do you want to crop it? Is there anything in the background that's not right? Yeah, so it's just taking your time with it and fixing it after the fact. Like, is the horizon straight? Like little things like that I see that people post. I'm like, oh, you could have fixed that so easily, that one little issue. Because it's a reflection of your aesthetic and your attention to detail. A potential client is seeing that, and they're going to relate the two, whether or not it has anything to do with your ability as a landscape designer. If they think you're not paying attention to details and how you represent yourself, it detracts from you, if that makes sense.
Well, I think some of it is not necessarily that they know or understand what it is, but they get that sense of, something's off balance or something doesn't feel right. They might not realize that that's what's happening, but I think most people are really in tune to it, whether they can verbalize it or not.
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost a feeling like, like something is a little off here, but they might not be able to articulate just because they haven't had a background in, design, where they're thinking about composition and balance and scale and symmetry and all these things that we've had, an education in.
So most of your design work, well, maybe not most, but a good portion of your design work is mid-century modern or contemporary style, which really showcases what you were just talking about with the balance and composition of spaces. Tell me what about that style appeals to you most?
I mean, I think that's exactly it. Is I definitely, for some reason, my brain really likes order. Order and simplicity. I always joke I'm that person at the gym when I get on the exercise bike, I straighten it out so it's in line with the other bikes. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really weird. What am I doing? But I think it's just the way my brain operates. So I like things to make sense. I like it to be simplified. I like order. So I guess that mid-century, more contemporary feel lends itself to that. So sometimes I'll be honest, I have trouble with curved lines. Like some of my fellow designers, everything is much more fluid, and it's not where my brain goes initially. So I have to push myself, which you can do. That's like you challenge yourself. But I think that's what it really is. It's the clean lines and the simplicity and that restraint. Yeah. I think I don't know. I just sort of gravitated towards that. I just think it's that sort of analytical and creative brain working together, which I think is why I like this profession so much.
Yeah.
So I get to use both sides.
Well, and then the plant material gives it that softness that otherwise you get that really cold, kind of harsh modern feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so the plant material really, creates that balance.
Exactly. You can sort of soften the hard lines and with the plants or the color scheme, whatever it is.
A lot of the mid-century modern designs really call for like simple mass plantings. Being a plant lover, do you find it's hard to show restraint in those situations when you're designing and not being able to use as many different varieties and variation?
Yes, definitely. I mean, sometimes like I can even look back on designs and I'm like, oh, I wish I had edited even more. So it's always a constant process, you're always evolving, but I think, it's like you do a design and you look at the planting plan and then look at the plant list. And sometimes it's like forcing yourself, what can I take out? Like, what can I remove from this? I mean, sometimes it depends on the client. If the client wants really full and lush and lots of variety, you give them that. But if they really do want simplicity, than it is. It's like you do the design and then taking that extra step to sort of stop and look at it and going, what can I take out? That restraint aspect of it, which is difficult for sure.
Well, and then it means that every plant that you do choose has to perform that much better too. And
Yeah, I
take
think,
up
yeah,
the seasonal interest balance is harder with less variety.
that's a good point. I think it's like really, you have to be very thoughtful about what each plant is doing. Like, what's the goal? Is it about texture? Is it offering, a vertical element? Is it height in this one place? Is it, a ground cover, a mass planting? I think your plants you have to be much more thoughtful about what they're doing. And do you need multiple plants doing the same thing, or can it just be one plant that's serving that purpose?
Do you find it harder to get that mass planting, that simple look in smaller gardens where you don't have the square footage to really have the same impact?
Definitely. It's something, I still am learning and sort of struggling with, like, that idea of planting in ribbons. Yeah, I always feel like oftentimes that lends itself to a much larger space and landscape, but I think it can still be done in smaller landscapes, so the idea is, you're getting away from like almost a blur of one of this, one of this, one of this, so the viewer they're seeing like a tapestry or a swath of color or a swath of texture. Exactly. So you're having sort of bands and ribbons, so it can be done on a smaller scale, but it's difficult, and I think it's always most impressive when it's like a botanical garden or something like that. And you can really see it, the mass planting. So it's possible. It's just harder. And that's when I say, it's like, well, think of your groupings of 7 or 9 or something, instead of like, if it was a larger scale project, it'd be 45 of this plant, I think you just have to be even that much more careful, and thinking about it, is it the tiered planting and what's happening behind it? Because yeah, it's hard, but you just have to, I guess, be even that more careful about it.
Well, and I feel like sometimes it's a balance, because the seasonality of things, like if you had a huge swath of like 50 like black-eyed Susan, it's going to make a huge impact when it's in bloom. But when it's cut down in the winter, it's a huge impact in the opposite direction. So even with grasses, like once grasses get cut back, you've got that season of their visual impact degrading the landscape can be equally as hard to balance sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. And is the client okay with that? Are they okay with leaving seed heads up,
Yeah.
Because that can extend the season. Or do you plant something evergreen in front of that row of black-eyed Susan, so when they die back, you don't see them as much? I always say that about, alliums, because they're great in May. You can have this row of purple balls, and they're very architectural looking, but the foliage is really scrappy.
Yep.
So it's like, well, probably put something evergreen, a grass or a shrub, in front of it, so you can hide that scrappiness, but you can have that cool, those purple line of purple, or the alliums. But it's again like thinking like, well, what's happening in front of it? Yeah, and seasonality.
Yeah.
What's the client okay with? Maybe they're okay with some bare earth. Things don't always need to be fully covered. Like, I think I'm learning that as well. That it's almost like the quietness of winter is okay. Like, it's like, take a break. Because it's so loud, like in summer. There's so much color and there's so much going on and so much activity. It's almost this like explosion of plant life, which is great, but in a way it's kind of nice to like, okay, the garden is quiet now. It's resting, and I'm resting too, because I'm not sort of, I don't want to say assaulted. That's
overstimulated.
Yeah, by everything that's going on, which is exciting and energizing. But then you sort of need a break, and the garden needs a break. So learning that's okay, actually, to have maybe some bare earth. Not everything needs to be covered.
Yeah. I like that. Well, and it also, like, it builds that sense of anticipation also, when you've got like, the one hellebore that's blooming versus, the 12 other things that are blooming in the summer. Like, what's coming, what's on the horizon. So I think that there's some joy to be found in the anticipation as well.
Yeah, and it's like like you're saying, like, you're appreciating the seasons, and then you're appreciating the plants maybe more as well. Like, oh, I get to look forward to bulbs now.
Yeah.
You're not sort of being distracted by all the other things that are going on. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
What do you love most about being a landscape designer?
I think the thing, honestly, for me, I always go back to something my dad said because he would take night classes. He was a math teacher and he'd take like a chemistry class at night that taught him how to distill essential oils from lavender or something. And he had this idea or thought of like being a lifelong learner. And that really stuck with me because this profession, we're constantly learning. There's something new, there's new plants, there's a new design style, there's new other, designers or, contemporary designers that you're interested in and following. So I just feel like it's always changing. So it doesn't get boring, or it shouldn't anyways. I mean, that's kind of my view on it. I guess it could for somebody, but I like to kind of keep my eye out and like, well, what's happening, what's changing, and how can I incorporate maybe some of this? So I think that's the main thing, is that you're, as a landscape designer, you're always changing and evolving and learning. And then obviously the flexibility, like, of being able to work at home some of the time and be alone and really focus and be creative and have that mental space, which is really nice. It's almost like a luxury. And then to be able to get out and meet new clients and contractors. I mean, some of the clients, like, when you have that mix of like a really fun project that's a nice client, a great contractor, and that sort of synergy where everything mixes, and those are the best projects. It's not really about how big they are. It's just like having a really great client who's maybe letting you do something creative or something new, and having a really great contractor that you trust and who does wonderful work, and just mutual respect between everybody. And those are the sweet spot. Like, that's always at least what I'm striving for as a designer.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, new contemporary designers, and new trends and things like that. Who inspires you? Is there anyone in particular?
Yeah, I'm always looking around. When I do my designs, the first thing I do is sort of get online and start collecting visuals. Just, I'm a super visual person, and that was my background, was in imagery. So I'll always create what I call light boxes, but like a Pinterest board or House, whatever you use, I collect a bunch of images, and then my brain starts to, like, there's something I see, I like this, or I've never seen this, or this, I could solve the problem this way. And that's when I start to sort of put it all together for the client. So when I'm looking around, there's some designers right now that I like to follow. There's some up in Canada that I like. Claire Kennedy Design, Botanica Design. There's some architecture firms, like Considered Design is also another one I like. I don't know exactly how it's pronounced, but it's ORCA Living. This is down in California. And Sarita Jacquard Design, and then Stevens Design Studio in San Francisco. And all of those, I feel like what I'm interested in is this mix between, it's contemporary, but it has a organic element to it. It's very simplified, and there's a natural element to it. It's not overly built, and it's not cold. So you can say it's modern, but it's not cold.
Still
and
warm and approachable.
Yeah, there's something, it's hard to kind of articulate, but oftentimes I'll see some sort of little special element, like the way they used a stone as the step that leads into their back patio or something, or their choice of hardscaping materials in an interesting way that I've never seen before. It's hard to articulate, but it's this mix of like contemporary, but also simple, and using organic materials that, but there's still a softness and a warmth to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the balance of adding natural materials to a lot of contemporary design has a lot of harsh, very rigid materials, steel and concrete, and adding some natural elements, like you said, a natural stone for a step like that, it softens it and it makes it not so cold. It warms it up.
I feel like it makes the space more inviting, like you're more likely to get out into the space. And then I love it if I can, like I said, I'm always trying to add some sort of little special element, like what makes that different than just walking into like, oh, it's a functional landscape. And sometimes that's exactly what the client wants and needs, and that's fine. But if I can add in some sort of little special detail that makes it interesting or cool, that's kind of what I'm striving for. And I feel like these designers have done a good job of that, just using materials in a clever way or tying it into some other part of the design. And I guess it's just pushing yourself in a little bit. Still giving the client a totally functional landscape, but is there some little element that you can put in that they're willing to go for? You know, sometimes they're not, but
Yeah.
right.
Well, and it's those little things that stand out. And I feel like sometimes when I get really busy, those little details get skipped. And so it's nice to have the time to settle into a design and think about, you know, what things can be incorporated. I worked with a stonemason years ago that had a little toolbox of colored, like they look like marbles, all kinds of different, and they were all handmade glass elements that I think his wife makes. And every project that he did, he would have the client pick out a stone that they liked that would be incorporated in like a tiny little spot, like on the back of a wall or something, where it was like almost like his signature. And it was just kind of a really cool, very unique detail that didn't take a whole lot more time. It didn't add to the cost of the project, but it was a unique, very identifying thing that I think added to the experience. And so those little things I think make a big difference.
Well, it makes it more personal, I think, too. You're like, oh, no one else has this. You know, I chose this little stone. No one else has something like that. And somehow it makes it more special.
Yeah, for sure.
It's always what I'm like, you know, it's hard to articulate, but I'm always like, how do you make this special? And it, like you said, it takes time. You know, it's like sitting down and thinking like, well, what is this? And that's when you start to sketch and draw little, you know, have little weird drawings. And I have so many of those scribbles laying around. And trying to make sure, like giving the time to do it. Cause like you said, it's like things get busy but that's what I think what makes it fun. For me, it's like when that happens and the contractor can do it, because maybe you have this what you think is a fantastic idea, but they're like, no, you know, which is totally fine.
Yes, we can do that, but it's going to cost X amount more to, you know, add this little piece. And you're like, oh, is that worth it? You know?
Yeah. Or I always just say, just be honest with me and tell me no if this is like not possible. You know?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not, or they say yes, but then it's like, yeah, but like you said, the extra cost. And then it's, you know, is the client willing to do that? So it's a balance for sure. But I think just trying to find those little ways to push yourself and challenge yourself.
I started keeping a long time ago. I started keeping a little notebook in my car so that when I would have like random ideas, or when you're driving down, you see like a new home under construction that has like a cool detail for the beams or something, I would like pull over and quickly like sketch the idea out. And I mean, it definitely ebbs and flows. Like I'll go for months, like using it on a regular basis. And then I'll go for another couple months where I'm not even sure where the notebook is. And then something will like spark
you
that,
find it.
like, oh, I should start using this again. But I find that like those little things. And then when I think about it, then I'll flip through it.
Because you can head down a line and get all excited. You know, you get excited or they get excited, and then the reality of the budget hits, you know, okay, you know, how do we pare this back? Which is okay. I always tell them that's part of the process too. I'm like, this is very normal. This is kind of the way it goes. I'll do my best to keep it in, you know, in your range, but I've noticed it's getting tighter as well. And so I guess I'm probably trying to be more careful up front, you know. It's, I don't know, nature of our business, right? It's always, I always say we ride the economy, you know, whatever's happening with the economy affects our business because we really are sort of, you know, we're a luxury.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's not just the actual economy, but the perceived economy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so I think a lot of it is just that mindset of, you know, people's either pessimism or optimism of, you know, where the next 5 years are going to be. Especially with most of our clientele, like they're going to have the funds to invest in something like this, regardless of what the economy does, for the most part. And so it is a luxury, but they're also the people that are in that position to have that disposable income for a reason. So they're much more intentional and thoughtful about how they're spending and what they're spending it on. and asking those questions of, okay, you know, this little detail, how much extra does that cost? Is it worth it?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And that's the tricky part, because like, how much do you push it as a designer and convince them or try to convince them?
Yeah.
Because that goes back to like, well, when we're presenting the design, do you let it go? Do you try to push them?
Yeah. Well, I
It's,
think that there's a healthy balance of sometimes what is on paper doesn't have the visual impact on the whole design as what it will when it's installed. And sometimes there's elements that I think are easier to convey that to people than others.
yeah.
Sometimes there's an element, like even a color, that you're like, this is going to have big impact. But on plan view, it's like, oh, it's, whatever, like that plant doesn't really stand out that much. Or, even that piece of art, like, okay, well, it'd look the same if it was this color or that color. It's like, no, the color matters, or the element matters in the whole composition. Because you and I, as we're designing, we're visualizing it in 3D, but we're presenting it in 2D. So it's hard sometimes to convey that impact.
Definitely. And I feel like it's like understanding the client and their ability to sort of understand your plan, because sometimes they get it right away. Some people like, oh, they understand the space. Maybe they have some sort of design background or understanding as well. And others, like you said, just really don't have a sense for understanding something in plan view. So that's when you kind of like, okay, this is my job. I've got to figure out a way to convey this idea to them in a different way. So whether it's collecting images and showing them images, or popping it up into 3D, or doing a cross section. I like to sketch, so I'll, often do it for myself, because I'm trying to like, wait, what's happening in my head here? And then I'll try to put it up into a cross section. And then I realize, oh, I should probably share this with the client, because if I'm trying to visualize it, they probably would like to visualize it differently as well. So I think it's understanding your client and what do they need for the design to make sense for them.
Right. If you were to guess, like, what percentage of your clients are highly visual people versus not visual?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a total mix. And I sort of go back and forth which ones are easier to work with. Sometimes that's like the ones that have a really strong sense of what they want. They're giving you more parameters, like more.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be difficult because it's more limiting. Like,
right.
Oh, shoot, like they really know what they want. Like it has to look like this. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Whereas the others really have no sense of color, no sense of space or visual composition, anything. But then that can be difficult because it's so open-ended.
That one really depends on the trust and the relationship, because you can get someone that just cannot visualize it, does not understand, that is really leery and is feeling uneasy about, well, I don't know, do I make the wrong decision? Or you get someone on the other end of the spectrum that's like, I don't understand this, but I know that I've given you enough information that you can make that decision for me. And then I feel like it's okay.
Yeah, if they trust you. I mean, I've had that as well. Like, and hopefully that's something you can get a sense for in the initial meeting, because I've had that before where I'm feeling like they're not trusting me. And I'm like, either I'm not doing a good job of communicating, and sometimes it's frustrating. So I'm like, why did you hire me because you see my body of work, you hope that they've done their research in a sense, like they've seen your website, they've seen your Instagram feed, whatever it is, whatever you're putting out there, how you're representing yourself. My hope is that they know what they're going to get because they can see what I've done in the past. And so sometimes when I get a strange pushback, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm not sure if it's on their end or my end. Like maybe I'm not doing a good job of communicating and I need to come to them with something else. But that is sort of the delicate balance. Like we play with the clients, right? Like that dance of like, well, what do they need? And how do I convince them? And how do I get them to trust me? Because that's something else, I always say, this is such a personal profession, like job, because we're in their spaces. Oftentimes we're in their house. We're walking through their house. We're looking out their windows of what their views are. We're sitting down at their dining room table. We're talking to them about how they live. How do you use your space? Do you have kids? Do you have dogs? How long do you want to live here? We get pretty deep it's kind of intimate, right? We're really
Yeah.
involved in their lives, and we're creating something that's going to affect how they use their space and their happiness and their enjoyment. So I try to always respect that. Like what we do, like we're very involved in their lives. And so to get that trust from the client, I think is really important. So that's why I would say it's like if they're not trusting me, what am I not giving them? What am I not like somehow I'm not coming off right, or I'm not sharing the right information with them. And I'll admit it's frustrating for me when I feel that, because I pride myself on being able to connect
Yeah.
with clients. And I think you're good at that too. Like when you meet them for the first time, it's like you're looking at how, if the couple, how they interact together, how they're talking to you. Because if you don't have a good relationship with that client, it's like a good connection, because you really have to, I think, have a good connection.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to create something very personal for them.
Well, I think for you and I both, the goal is to create something that they would do themselves if they had the skills and ability to do so. Like
Yep.
it's not about creating something that is your style or your aesthetic or what you would do if it was your property, but really creating something very personal and catered to that individual client. And I find that sometimes I feel like most clients, once I've talked to them on the phone and once I've met with them in person, are super open. And I mean, I've had clients that are like, come into my bedroom, see what I look at when I wake up in the morning. And, it's very personal. But then you get some people that take a lot more questions, a lot more kind of poking and prodding to get that sense of like who they are and what makes them tick and what is the most important and most valuable to them.
Right.
And I think a
Yeah.
lot of it is whether they're doing the landscape for themselves or whether they're doing it as more of a status symbol, like something that,
Yeah.
they want something nice for their friends to look at or to have parties, and it's not for them. And I feel like that's where a lot of that kind of interpretation of what they're saying versus what they're meaning comes into play. Like what's their motivation?
Yeah. Or if it's just to add value to the house and then sell it for
Yeah.
resale value. So it almost like it's taking the personal out of it. Because I think
Mhm.
that's like, I think we're both saying it's like, it's more fun when you can actually, you're creating it for them and you're hoping that they're going to enjoy it. This is a space they're actually really going to,
Yeah.
enjoy. I always joke, we've said it before, like you have to be sort of like therapist,
Yeah.
so many marriage counselor, whatever, mixed up in one for this job. But I think that's also part of it. When you asked me earlier what I actually really like trying to figure out the people
Yeah.
and connect with them. Like, do they have a sense of humor? Can I connect with them on humor? Do I have to be businesslike? Do I have to be like, I prefer it when I think I'm funny and I can jokes, those are my favorite clients where we can have a banter back and forth and it makes it like, oh, they're fun. Like I like them. But I think that sort of that element of us walking in or talking to them on the phone for the first time and trying to figure them out, like enjoying people. Like I think you have to kind of enjoy people to a certain extent to do this. And I guess I like that challenge of how can I connect with them? How can I establish trust? That's what I'm trying to do off the very first meeting, is put them at ease, make them comfortable, feel confident in my abilities and how I'm presenting myself and what I think we can do, and creating a sense of trust right from the very get-go, and then hopefully carry that through, because then it makes everything so much easier.
I think the people aspect is a lot bigger than what I ever expected. When I was in college, I took quite a few sociology classes. I was like, I think just a couple credits shy of a minor, unintentionally. Just because I needed filler electives and I found it interesting and it ended up being, very helpful. But I think that that's a really big piece of it. And that, like you said, the therapy between spouses or even, dealing with neighbors that they don't get along with very well and things like that is always an ever flowing piece that adds another layer to the design.
Definitely makes it
Oh,
challenging but interesting, right?
yeah, for sure. To kind of move on, what are some of your goals for your business in the future? Because how long have you been in business now?
I guess 10 years. I started in 2013
Okay.
is when I really launched my business. I was doing the internship and working for other designers prior to that, but it was 2013 when I really launched my business. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on 10
I
years.
know.
That's
I'm like, wow, 10 years.
fabulous.
Yeah. Thank you. But my goals, like moving forward, I feel like that's something I'm still trying to figure out. Lots of different ways of taking your business. And so I'm constantly trying to think about like, well, what do I enjoy most about this business? And then also for me, stage of life, because I still have 2 kids at home that are things are very intense, in terms of their activities. And that's my priority and focus. So um, I'll be honest, it's a challenge and I don't think I've fully figured it out yet, what I want to do. All I know is right now my focus is my family and making sure that I have time and flexibility to go to the tournament or pick them up from school or do the field trip, whatever it is. I don't know that I have fully figured it out yet. And I like my flexibility right now. And I think I'm not ready to give that up. So it's just me. So I don't really want to bring on employees now at this point because I just want to worry about myself. So yeah, that's a good question. Do I want to teach? Do I want to, I don't know, get into the photography part of it? Do I want to write articles about trends and landscape design? All these things I've thought about. But I think I'm still learning where I am and I'm still trying to find the right mix of not being too busy, but finding the sweet spot. Like I said, I mean, that's honestly what I'm striving for, is not about how big the project is, not about how many I'm doing, but it's trying to really hone in my ability to recognize those clients or those projects that are going to be the fun ones. And if I did 3 of those a year or 5 of them a year, I'd be happy, where I feel like I'm pushing myself, I'm doing something creative, I've got a good relationship with the client and the contractor. I've got some flexibility to be with my family, and I'm earning enough. Like I don't need to have a fancy vacation. That's always what I say. I just have to make sure I'm contributing to the family and we can pay for our kids' volleyball. And it's like I joke that I'm working to pay for my kids' activities.
Sports are expensive,
Oh
very
my gosh,
expensive.
all of that. Yeah, it is. It is. I love it. I love every minute of it. So it's I'm probably not giving you a good answer, but I think I'm still figuring it out and I'm pretty happy where I am right now. Maybe when my children are grown and don't care if mom is home when they get home, then, or don't care if I go to these activities, then I can work 12 hours a day but I don't really want to do that right now.
Yeah. I think that quality over quantity is, I think even for me, that's kind of the goal in terms of like what you want to strive for is really kind of honing in, like working with your ideal clients. And I feel like there's some value in having a not ideal client to make you value the good ones that much more. But once you've had that many years of experience, you've had enough of those to have that perspective. And I think really in terms of quality of life and the time that you spend away from your family or away from other activities or hobbies that you enjoy is valuable. And so having that be doing it something that is adding joy and value to your life, I think is important. And having that quality piece.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And something that you've probably found as well is, when people hear that you do landscape design, like, oh, must be so fun. And sometimes your back gets up a little bit because they think you just go to the nursery and pick out flowers and plant flowers, which we do get to do. I'm not saying we don't get to do, but this job, I think going back to what I was saying about it being so personal, there is a fair amount of stress that comes along with it because you're trying so hard to create something for a client and give them a good experience. I know you and I both, we both experienced this, that you're not just putting your job away when you're done. You're thinking about it at night. And you and I have both had cases where we have trouble sleeping because you're trying to solve a problem or, a design challenge or something, or make sure something goes smoothly with the client. Like this job is it can be quite intense.
Yeah.
If something isn't going the way you thought it was going to be, like, you discover the tank under the patio or something that now needs to be removed. And now the budget is way higher than the client thought it was going to be. And you have to soften that blow and you feel bad or something you missed, there's mistakes happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that keeping the stress, people don't realize, like this job can be quite stressful. And all the things that we need to keep balanced and understand, and permitting and codes and laws and, all these budgets and how things are built. So I think that's another big thing for me right now. When you ask, like, where do I want to go with my job or my career right now, is building my business, which has been super fun. I enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it more than I thought I would, the actual building the business part of things and learning things. And I always say, like, at the beginning, I was in hustle mode. I was like, I'll say yes to just about anything. Like, yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. And I was working on weekends and working late at night, and to build your business, because I have to contribute to my family. I don't have the luxury of, like, I need to help pay the bills. And that got super it's very stressful. Like, you learn, like, wow, I just took on too much. Like you said, those difficult situations. So I think that's where I am now, is thankfully, I guess I've been through enough of those painful situations. I'm figuring out, like, you know what? I think I'm good. I'm good right here. I don't need to keep pushing right now. It's not the right time right now for me to push and try to grow my business into a 10-person, office or something. I know sort of my tolerance level. And that's, I think, something that somebody coming into the profession needs to kind of, like, and maybe you don't know until you get into it. You don't know, like, what level of stress can you deal with? Because this job can be stressful.
Well, and what elements stress you out more? Is it the, concrete pour that's coming up 2 days from now? Or is it the permit documents? Is it, there's so many pieces. And I feel like as a landscape designer, once you bridge beyond that, just planting design piece, there's just an indefinite gamut of things that you need to have knowledge on, from stone to concrete to wood to metal to engineering and architecture. And there's so many pieces. And then you start adding in really complex things like pools and gas fire pits and artwork and water features. And it just, like, it builds, and there's you get a project that has a little bit of all of those things, and it really kind of condenses the intensity.
Definitely, which can make it interesting, right? Because that goes back to that lifelong learner thing. Because you're like, ooh, I got to figure out how to build a pergola. And then you have to kind of figure it out on the fly. Like, all right, I got to figure this out. So it's fun and stressful at the same time. And it's like you said, if you have too much of that, or if you've got the other thing that, we talk about is, at least we don't have just one project going at a time. We've got multiple projects going at a time, and they're all at different phases. So you're not just trying to keep one of these in going in sequential order. There's multiple things happening, like, oh shoot, this contractor wants me to do this, and this is going to happen in 3 weeks, and that client hasn't gotten back to me yet with feedback on the concepts, and you're still, oh, and I've got to pick out roses for this person, and oh shoot, we got to switch those lights out for that other one. It's like, people don't understand how hard waiting tables is. I always say that, like, if you ever waited tables, you're walking through and someone says, oh, can you please bring me, water with lemon in it? Oh, and I need the ketchup. And you're in your brain, you're like, oh my gosh, 6 people just told me something different. And as I walk back through the cooking station, I've got to grab the water with no ice or the lemon, and I've got to remember to get the Tabasco sauce. And, we've got constant things going on in our brain. And so it's, that's our challenge, is how to manage all of that. And sometimes you just can't, because we only have so much control over the schedule, because we're working with contractors and they've got schedules too. And sometimes we can't tell them no, because they've got to keep their guys going and busy. And if you want to keep that relationship good with the contractor, which is super valuable, you go, okay, yes, I will be there in 20 minutes and look at the drainage, and you drop what you're doing and you get in the car and you go,
Do you find that having that close relationship with your contractor helps reduce the stress?
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh. If you have a contractor that you trust, and the contractor that calls you when something comes up, and the contractor that will have a couple solutions for whatever the issue is, because like I said, I have no idea. I don't know how that thing is built. Can you tell me, like, what can we do? And they're like, hey, you can do it this way, or you can do it this way. Oh gosh, it's so valuable. It's so valuable. And you hold on to those ones. I mean, those are the contractors you bring cookies to, and, tell them how wonderful they are, because
for sure. I think that's something that, again, kind of that that value of my business, I think, is not just me. It's, I
Mhm.
mean, obviously I have employees and they're a big value as well, but I feel like the partnerships that I've created and the relationships, whether it's having a designer like you that I can be like, I have no idea how to specify, this, and having that ability, but then also having a contractor that I know has the same values and wants the client to be just as happy as I want them to be, that I can rely on his knowledge and experience and his ability and willingness to do whatever it takes to make things right, helps reduce that stress. And I think, again, it kind of comes back down to that trust factor of, client trusting you, that what they want and what will get them the value they're looking for. But then
Mhm.
your trust in the contractor and the contractor's trust in you. Like, I think that it really kind of is that sweet spot, like you were talking about, where you got those relationships that really build on things and make it fun and exciting. And one of those projects where it ends and you're like, oh, I kind of don't want it to end.
Yeah, whether it's like the relationship, because sometimes you really, really like the people and you want
Yeah.
to stay in touch with them, or it's something you're proud of.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of that. Like, hey, I pushed myself on that,
Yeah.
or I made that happen, with the help of, obviously, like we're saying, with the
Yeah.
contractor, and like, because we can't do this on our own, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Just going back to that, trying to find the sweet spot.
Yeah. You already touched on it a little bit, but what, for someone looking to switch careers, so not just someone that's new into the industry, but thinking about, okay, I'm, either not loving what they're doing, or, at a kind of a breaking point where they feel like they're looking for something different, what would be your, maybe it's best advice that you received or best advice that you have in hindsight looking back for someone in that position?
Yeah, I guess a couple things. The first thing I always tell people is to be a joiner. Um, we're lucky here, at least in the Pacific Northwest. We've got a really great community of people, like horticulturalists, other designers. I mean, like you were saying, like we have like a little handful of designers that we'll call each other and be like, hey, do you have a minute? Because you get stuck. What do I do here? Or how do I deal with this client? Or what should I say to the contractor? So meeting people is really, really important, I say. So if somebody's just starting out, you can't just sort of sit in your house and expect things to come to you. You have to join the groups, find out, like, we're both members of the Association of Professional Landscape Designers or Northwest Horticulture Society. Start volunteering. I think that's what really launched me. Is I got lucky. I mean, I volunteered. This is like no money. Volunteering, it was 4 hours a week going to the botanical garden, but making time for that, and then meeting really great people who are then like, hey, do you want to consider this internship? And it was $10 an hour, the internship. So I was not making, only 20 hours a week, $10 an hour. But I met really wonderful people. And then it's talking about what you want to do, asking tons of questions, calling people, like doing your research and looking at people that you like, oh, I respect that design or whatever their aesthetic is. And then calling them up and just being like, can I have coffee with you? I remember my brother, and not being afraid of that. My brother gave me that advice. He's like, oh, people love to talk about themselves. I mean, listen to me, like talking right now, but it's true. So just don't be afraid to ask people like, hey, I really love what you do. Would you mind me talking to you for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, taking you out for coffee and learning about them? Because that's how you figure out what you want to do and what you don't want to do. So being a joiner, I say you got to get out there. You got to join the groups. You got to talk to people. You got to share what you want to do, because this is a really wonderful community, and more likely than not, people are going to want to help you, and they're going to refer you. Be like, hey, I just met this woman who wants to get into landscape design. Are you willing to take her on as an intern? People will want, I found that people want to help you if you're a good person and you're genuine. And then the other thing, like for a career switcher, there's probably something from your previous job or career that will translate into this profession, whether it's understanding business or how to promote yourself or how to deal with clients try to think about like your skill set that you have and that you can really leverage that, because there's so many things that go into this job that, I guess it's don't feel like you're starting over totally from scratch, because you probably already have something that's super valuable that you can use and maximize for this profession. And for me, it was like marketing. It was like sort of understanding marketing and understanding imagery. Those are the two things that I think I got from my previous profession. But there's, it can be anything. It can be working with people. It could be doing your accounting, your books. Like, that's not my strength. Like, I'm not great at that. So I have a bookkeeper, or is it building websites? I don't know, like there's probably something that can translate to this profession. Yeah,
for sure. So one last question before I let you go. Is there any content that has inspired you recently, whether it's a book or a blog or a designer or something recently that you've taken more note of?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying, is like, I'm constantly just sifting through visuals, and looking at, there's certain designers that I really respect and I think are doing interesting work, whether they're, the ones up in Canada or down in California. There's some really interesting ones.
And I'll go through and I'll link those in the show notes when I edit this too.
Sure. You'll probably see the common thread that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, the correct answer is to like get out and go to different shows. Like, I have all these grand ideas of going to gallery openings and things like that and being inspired.
I thought I'd go to so many garden tours last summer and I made it to one.
Yeah.
And the only reason I made it to that one is because I was part of putting it
together. I know, because we're so busy, right?
Yeah.
And we just have to, like we're saying, like our jobs, we just have to go with the flow. And so you think like, oh, I'm going to give myself time. And sometimes it's really, really hard to carve out that time to go to, the garden tour. But I mean, that's totally valuable. Yeah, that's important. Is something that I don't do enough of as well. And because that's usually when you do get really great inspiration, is when you're in a space. So if you can go on garden tours, and that's the other thing too, is even if you're not in your own city, like going on a garden tour, like you're traveling and you're in Palm Springs. So it's definitely not the plants that we use here in Washington, but you'll probably see some other really interesting solution to a similar problem that you have. Like, oh, look how they use that cactus to screen the air conditioner, something, So you're right. That's definitely something to like remember to do, is go on garden tours, whether they're local or you're traveling. Because sometimes the ones where you're traveling are even the best, because it's something unexpected. Allow yourself to be inspired, because it is easy for us to get just like churning through our designs and clients and scrambling, because I think you and I both have similar personalities where it's really important for us to meet and exceed expectations. And if we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it when we say we're going to do it. So we really, really hustle. And I think that's why we've been successful, because then people feel comfortable referring you. But I mean, sometimes we don't have a lot of time cut out for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's always fun. Like I said, it is fun to talk about yourself and what you do. And I think, just looking back on the journey and like what worked and what didn't work, and hopefully I've had really wonderful people take me under their wing with this profession, like other designers that are 20 years ahead of me that have been willing to share what they've done and share their information and their knowledge, and how thankful I've been for that. And so I think that's where I am. If I can share anything, I'm still learning. Like I said, there's so much I'm still learning about, but I guess if there's anything I can pass on, like any little bits of information about, like I said, my growing pains, and maybe help somebody skip that, get a bookkeeper.
That's one of the big motivators for why I started doing this. And that's the thing that I've gotten the most feedback from people, is people starting out or that just don't know where to look for information. Or sometimes it's just people wanting to know that they're not the only ones that, have thought about that or struggled with that, or, looking for ideas on how to do something in particular. So I think that I love that I've been able to find so many other designers willing to join me coming onto this and share, their thoughts, their wisdom. And I mean, I feel like you and I are kind of in the same boat where, we're probably going to be 80 years old doing landscape design going, I'm still learning. I'm still learning.
Yes. And still hopefully having fun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much about this profession that you can't learn in school. They can't teach you because they can't replicate what's going to happen with a client. And you don't learn it until you get out there. So having these conversations and talking to other designers, and I think you're also talking to contractors with this podcast as well, but that's how you learn. You just got to get in there, and it gets messy, and you just go for it, and hopefully meet good people along the way, because the people you associate yourself with makes all the difference.
For sure. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There's a couple things that I want to highlight from my discussion with Courtney. First of all, being a lifelong learner. I think that is so important, and it is a great mindset. I also loved the discussion of the composition of design and how that plays into photography and marketing and the power of imagery. And then adding in special details to make each project unique. That is going on a sticky note on my computer so that I can remember, push myself to do those extra little details. And then last but not least, I really think that it's great, her advice on if you're switching careers, not to underestimate your existing knowledge and knowing that you likely have much more transferable skills than you think. Please reach out and let me or Courtney or both of us know what you thought of the episode. If you've got any questions or any thoughts on anything that we discussed, you can find Courtney at olandergardendesign.com and on social media at olandergardendesign. You can also leave a message if you're listening on Spotify, and be sure to share this with a friend. To wrap up, I want to thank you for your time. I hope the ideas discussed today have left you feeling excited and energized. As I build both my business and my life, I value the support and feedback you provide. I would love for you to reach out to me to let me know what you think, give me ideas, or just to connect. Please don't forget to subscribe and also share with a friend. Until next time, go create something wonderful.